Chinese outbound tourists are, well, you have to look to some degree to where they're going, okay? If we're talking about Europe, which is perhaps what we're interested in here more, then most of the tourists that are coming here are relatively wealthy within China. They are relatively well educated. Many, if not most of them, will have at least one degree of some kind, and they're likely to be quite well above the average income. So, so it's a certain middle class strata of Chinese society that we're looking at. It is certainly a developing market, and it is a young sector in China. It's really only in the last 10 years that we've seen Chinese outbound tourism developing strongly. And inevitably, as the market develops, the places that are nearer to China attract Chinese people first. So the vast majority still go to Hong Kong, Taiwan and Macau, which are part of Greater China, have a cultural familiarity, it's cheaper, it takes less time to get there and so on. There are lots of reasons for going there. Then the next level is to move out to Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines and so on, which have also become popular tourist destinations in recent years. Again, they are nearer, they're cheaper, there's less distance to travel. You don't have to worry about jet lag and these kinds of things. So there's a certain natural affinity to going to those places, also where they can find cultural familiarity with large Chinese diasporas in those areas. If you look at Europe, the United States, Australia, obviously that's a lot, it's the next step. It's further away to travel, it's inevitable, it's more expensive, so it's inevitable that it's going to take longer for these markets to develop, and they're going to be more restricted to those that have the financial means to be able to get there. But as the Chinese economy continues to grow, as the Chinese middle classes become bigger and wealthier and spread out from the major cities to the second, third tier cities, there's quite a lot of potential for that market to grow. And even if at the beginning maybe even those tourists will start to go to those more proximate destinations, in the future they are also likely to be tourists, potential tourists for the European market, maybe in 10, if it's in 10, 15 years time. Well, I think what Europe can offer is an enormous amount. In Europe we have an enormous range of cultural and historical tourist destinations, a great heritage as Europe as a whole, but also as individual European countries, which are all potentially available to Chinese tourists and can be made available and will be of interest to Chinese tourists. They are, I would say, if we can say such a thing, naturally curious people. They're inquisitive, they value knowledge, they value education, and travel is part of that. Travel is a chance to become more knowledgeable and learn about other places and other people. Obviously, like tourists from anywhere, Western European tourists going to Asia often like to have some of the home comforts as well. They like to be able to feel, sometimes they can have familiar food. And they like to feel they're staying in a hotel that meets certain standards that they would expect to find or makes them feel more at home. So in a similar way, Chinese tourists, although they may be open to new experiences and looking for what is different to China in Europe and looking to experience the authentic Europe, whatever that may be for different people, they nonetheless, like many other people, if they are 10 days without having food that they're familiar with, may start to tire of it and look forward to having something that's familiar. And going some way to making places familiar through perhaps Chinese signage in tourist destinations, brochures that explain things in Chinese language as well. These things make it easier for Chinese tourists to appreciate Europe and potentially think about coming back again. So although they may have some increased demands that are perhaps not the same as those that we've already prepared for other tourists, there is potentially a payoff in investing in making this adaptation. One is, it's important to know China and Chinese people. Obviously, not everyone has got time to go and study in great depth Chinese culture and society and spend lots of time in China. But up to a certain level, it's relatively straightforward. You know, that if, with a little bit of time and money invested, and often just time, you can understand China better as a country, understand the people better as for the range of different kinds of people that there are, the cultural differences from north to south, the lifestyle differences from east to west, and so on and so forth. The more that people understand, people in the European tourist industries understand China and Chinese people and their culture and society, the more they're going to be able to cater to and please those tourists, and then potentially make them tell their friends and their family to come back for various reasons. So I think that's one thing that could be done. Another thing I think is that it's important to have coordinated planning, to coordinate the efforts at a national and local level. It's all very well, for instance, maybe a national government trying to make it easier for Chinese people to get tourist visas and to make the procedures easier, but then if those tourists then arrive in that country and they find that there's nothing written in Chinese, no one speaks Chinese, they struggle to get around, they struggle with the food, and the hotels are not what they expect, then they're not going to keep coming back. Okay. At the same time, there's no point in people at the local level investing their hard-earned money in translating their documentation into Chinese, maybe employing a Chinese speaker, trying to change their menus, etc., etc., to adapt to a Chinese clientele who then don't come because the tourist agencies in that country are not promoting Spanish or Italian or French or German tourism well enough in China. So it's a matter of coordinating the various different levels and making sure that the different offers and adaptations are working in conjunction with each other. New media is fundamental really for trying to reach out to Chinese travellers now. A recent survey which I was mentioning earlier this morning showed that 85% of Chinese outbound tourists share their photos and their experiences through blogs and so on online or through social media of one kind or another. That may be using Chinese versions of WeChat, which is a bit like WhatsApp, or using Weibo, which is like Twitter, or it could be sending emails, or it could be using online photo albums, or whatever it may be. But for 85% of outbound tourists, that's 85% of that 100 million that we're at now, that's 85 million people using these as a means of reporting what they're doing or what they've done in terms of their travelling. And all that information then becoming an important resource for people planning to travel abroad, then it's both vital to be able to link into that and to use that as a form of promotion, but it's also a great opportunity. And it need not necessarily, obviously you can invest in it, get someone to translate your websites into Chinese, to promote your website through social media in China. That would be one thing that you could do. But at the same time, maybe if you're working in a museum, you get friendly with Chinese tourists, get them to take a photo of you with them in front of the museum or a particularly notable exhibit, and see if they'll put it up on Weibo, and do that regularly, and more people, if they're having a good experience, they'll say something positive about it. And it's that kind of thing that gradually has the potential to to attract and make places, put places on the Chinese tourist map.